Somebody had a 10? Who said 10? 10? Kramer? I had a 12, dude. Yeah. Knocked it out of the park. I learned so many great things today, and I am literally quivering inside with excitement to share these insights. We've made a series of discoveries already, but tonight we're coming to a passage of Scripture that is perfectly calculated to give us a vision, a perspective, an angle on God's character that is absolutely breathtaking. Now, in order to access the subject this evening, I want to introduce you to a favorite author of mine. His name is George MacDonald. Anybody with an epic beard like that has to be taken seriously. George MacDonald, one of the greatest authors that ever lived, in a single statement got to the heart of not only what we're going to explore this evening, but he got to the heart of every aspect, every dimension of life. Notice these amazing words. He says, "Is power or love the making might of the universe, or the creative energy of the universe? Is love or power the making might of the universe?" He who answers this question aright has the key to all righteous, all good, all worthy questions. Now, this is astounding. He has distilled reality down to a fork in the road. He has essentially said to us that every single person on the planet is operating by one of two paradigms. One of two pursuits is underway. And I would suggest that every one of us, in every relationship, at any given moment, are leveraging power or leveraging love. All of our relationships are governed by either the desire to dominate, to control, to manipulate others, to get our way, or by the power of love by which we come underneath a person. Rather than dominating over, we come underneath and we minister to them and we value their freedom. Now, it's an amazing thing what happens when a human being is free. Freedom is the stuff out of which love and creativity is made. In fact, the first thing I learned as a young man, as a teenager, 18 years of age, that rocked my world and got me looking in the direction of Jesus was a simple but powerful equation. And it was this, that love requires freedom in order to exist. And freedom is risky. Because if I'm free to love you, then necessarily I'm free not to love you. Freedom necessitates a fork in the road. I can either abuse my freedom and leverage it over you to dominate, or I can channel my freedom in the direction of the honor, of the dignity and nobility of your humanity, and under the influence of my love, watch you blossom and flower and become more beautiful as a human being. What I'm suggesting to you is that literally everything that we're discovering here in our study of Bible prophecy has to do with these two principles. Now, we tend to think, oh, Bible prophecy, that's about future events, and I want to know the future, so I'll study Bible prophecy. And there's nothing wrong with being curious about the future, but I'm going to suggest to you that there are principles of life and relationships embedded in Bible prophecy. God is not interested in merely stimulating our curiosity and telling us about future events so that we can kind of have an aha, we know, and others don't type of an attitude. The fact is that at the core of Bible prophecy, both Daniel and Revelation, we're going to learn over and over again through our time together, at the core of Bible prophecy, we have a fork in the road that is being traced through history, where human beings, individually and collectively in the form of kingdoms, are using either the power of dominance and control and coercion, or the alternative power, the completely counterintuitive power, the countercultural power of love. Now, in our first evening together, we saw the contrast between power and love as these two principles that are operating. And we did that by looking at a prophecy in Daniel 2. Those of you who are here, you will remember Daniel chapter 2. It's an absolutely powerful and fascinating prophecy. I'm not going to go into the details of the prophecy. If you were not here, please get the DVD or the audio and review that material. But essentially what we discovered is that God gave a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar, a dream. It was a prophetic dream. It troubled him. A young Hebrew slave named Daniel was called upon by God and Nebuchadnezzar to interpret the dream. As the dream began to be interpreted, it was obvious what we are dealing with. A particular pattern is underway in the book of Daniel. Daniel said to the king Nebuchadnezzar explicitly, "King, you're the head of gold in this metal man image that you saw." You remember the image? The head was of gold, and that represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom of Babylon. Okay, we've been there, we've done that. Then we saw that Daniel went on and said, but after you, Nebuchadnezzar and the king of Babylon, there's going to be another kingdom. It'll be inferior, but it'll still conquer you and Babylon. And we learned that that kingdom, of course, was Persia, Media Persia to be exact. The Persians were stronger and went on to become the dominant force in that marriage of two powers. And then Daniel explained another power would come, and it would trump the one before, the Persian Empire. And so we saw that the kingdom of Greece, under the leadership, the ruthless, aggressive leadership of Alexander the Great, probably by many historians' estimation, the greatest military mind that has ever lived. And then came the kingdom of Rome. Again, this is just review in Daniel chapter 2, but then we saw something fascinating. We saw that in the metal man image, the iron monarchy of Rome gave way to those feet with the 10 toes and the mixture of iron and clay, and we saw that what that represents, what that symbolizes, is that the Roman Empire would not explode. It wouldn't be encroached upon by another kingdom, but in fact would implode. That it would fall in upon itself by moral decay and by the principle of coercion. It would prove itself to be unsustainable, and Rome crumbled around its own ankles, and the kingdom divided into 10 European nations. Those 10 European nations, we named them. We got very specific. We don't have time to do that right now. With all of that in the background from our first message, now we're launching into Daniel chapter 7. And this is the four beasts prophecy. This prophecy is a parallel prophecy to the metal man image, and we'll see that in just a moment. So the prophecy unfolds, and it's very simple and straightforward. It's a series of symbols. Chapter 7 of Daniel, verses 2 and 3, don't miss a line of this. All of it will become significant momentarily. I saw, Daniel is the one reporting to us, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring upon, say it out loud with me, the great sea. That's important. And notice, four great what? What's that word? Beasts came up from the what? The sea. This is the language we need to have foremost in our mind right now. And each was different from the other. All right? So then, these four beasts are specifically identified. They are described. In verse 4, we have the first beast described, and it's like a lion with eagle's wings. And Daniel says, I watched until the wings were what? Plucked. The wings were plucked off. of this lion, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to this lion. So here, embedded in the symbolism, the prophet wants us to understand, God through the prophet wants us to understand, that even though we're dealing here with a ferocious, carnivorous animal, a lion with eagle's wings, there's nothing like that in nature. Obviously, it's symbolic. The prophet wants us to understand that this is in fact metaphoric, and we're dealing here with a beast that is a man. Did you notice the transition? A beast that is, in fact, a human entity of some kind. Well, that'll become clear as we go on. Suddenly, there was another beast. And this one, the second beast, was like a bear. Lion, then we have a bear. And it was raised up on one side. And it had 3 ribs in the mouth between its teeth. And they said, whoever they are, Daniel's just having a vision, and he overhears some voices that say, "Arise and devour much flesh." So again, the language is of a beast that is carnivorous, and a lot of destruction in the wake of this beast's power. That's the bear. Then I looked, he says, and there was another. So now we have a third beast, and this one was like a leopard, and it had on its back how many wings? 4 wings. The lion had 2, the leopard has 4, and the leopard also, Daniel sees in his vision, has 4 heads, and dominion was given to the leopard beast. And then a 4th, this is amazing, follow it carefully. "And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. And this one," Daniel says, "was dreadful and terrible." Daniel doesn't associate this beast with any animal he's familiar with in nature. This beast transcends categorizing. This beast is just terrible. It's dreadful, and it was exceedingly strong. This beast is surpassing all the ones before. And it had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, and it was breaking in pieces, and it was trampling the residue. The word residue is a word in the Aramaic here that means that's that which is left. I mean, this power is moving like a mower across the land and taking human beings out and conquering even the smallest of kingdoms in its way. And then it was different. This is crucial. This 4th beast, he says, not only couldn't he describe it, he didn't have a word for it. He couldn't point to a lion, a bear, a leopard. He couldn't point to anything in nature. He said, listen, this thing was so terrible. It was so dreadful. It was so horrifically powerful in what it was doing to wreak havoc on the earth. And then he says, throwing in verse 7, it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, you'll remember that in the first prophecy of Daniel, the metal man image, the number 10 also figured in. There were the feet with the 10 toes. Hold that in mind for a moment. So we have, in his vision, an ocean, a sea, he says. And there are 4 beasts that come up out of the sea, a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a terrible nondescript beast. Now, I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag here a little bit early on and tell you that even though Daniel doesn't have a word for this beast, it doesn't occur anywhere in the book of Daniel, later on in Bible prophecy, this beast is called a dragon in the book of Revelation. And we will see that as this series unfolds. But check this out. The 4th beast of these 4 that Daniel saw, notice that he says in verse 23, explicitly, he deciphers the symbolism for us. The 4th beast shall be the 4th what, everybody? The 4th kingdom on the earth. So what do we know now? Daniel has been given a vision of 4 kingdoms. That's right. But these beasts he saw come up out of the raging sea, and we're told in another part of Bible prophecy that parallels Daniel, the book of Revelation in the New Testament, which uses a lot of the same symbols, including these four beasts, as we're going to see later on in the book of Revelation. And in Revelation, the symbol of the sea, the waters, is deciphered for us in chapter 17, verse 15. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits. Now pause right there. The harlot in Revelation is a parallel power to the fourth kingdom in Daniel. We're going to learn that later on. But right now we just want to point out that the waters which you saw were what? Peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. What does that tell us? Tongues are languages. Tongues are languages. So these beasts are arising. Now we have deciphered the beasts as kingdoms. These kingdoms are arising in succession, one after another. They're arising among peoples and multitudes, a populated part of the earth with nations and various languages. So we have here a sense that there's some geographic territory being covered by these powers. It's not confined. These powers are not confined to their own geographic location with their own people group in their own language. No, they're crossing borders and they are conquering many nations and peoples. Okay, back to Daniel now. And we said all of that to point out the parallel between Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. In Daniel 2, we have the metal man image with the head of gold and the arms and chest of silver and then the thighs of brass and then the legs of iron, and then the feet of a mixture of iron and clay. You remember that with the 10 toes representing the 10 European nations. And what we're seeing here now, and this is crucial, Daniel is operating on a very specific literary pattern. Literary pattern. The literary pattern of Daniel is, listen, repeat and enlarge. In Daniel 2, there is a prophecy that covers a span of history from the kingdom of Babylon straight down to the divided nations of Europe. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, divided Rome. Are you tracking with me? Then in chapter 7, God says, hey, Daniel, let me show you that same swath of history, but I'm going to fill in some details that weren't included in the first vision. So it's going to be the same period of history is going to be repeated, but there's going to be an enlargement in our understanding. Additional details are going to be contributed to the prophecy, to this particular period of history. So the head of gold parallels the lion. The silver chest parallels the bear. The bronze parallels the leopard, the iron, the dragon, and the 10 toes parallels the 10 what? Horns of the dragon-like beast. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and now some details. Rome divides. And now we launch into new territory. Now we're familiar so far from Daniel 2 with this particular swath of history, this particular pattern. But now details are added because the pattern is repeat and enlarge. So we come to verse 8 and we notice, I was considering, Daniel says, the horns, the 10 horns, that is, of the which beast? Number 1, 2, 3? No, number 4. I was considering the 10 horns of this dragon, like this horrific beast, and he says, another horn, a little horn, note the language, a little horn, coming up among them, that is, among the 10 horns, coming up among them. Pause right there with me. The toes parallel the horns. The toes and the horns represent the divided European nations, many peoples, nations, and languages that are the center of this fourth kingdom's, the epicenter of this fourth kingdom's power. Now, this is fascinating because among the 10 horns of the European nations, that is, among those nations, another power is going to arise, a little power at first. But as the prophecy unfolds, we find out that this power, which is small, becomes greater than all the ones that have preceded and rules for a period of time that puts to shame even the length of time that Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome reigned. It's amazing. A little horn coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. That is, when this power, this little one, begins to rise to prominence, 3 of those 10 European nations are going to be conquered in the process of this power asserting its place in history. And there, in this horn, check this out now, there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a what? Of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Do you remember that kind of metaphoric transition with the lion? Daniel says, I saw a lion, but I kept watching, and the lion's wings were plucked, and then the lion stood up on its feet and became a man. Now we have that same kind of transition between metaphor and reality. We have lion that transforms before Daniel and becomes a human, and then we have a horn which now before Daniel's eyes transforms and has the eyes of a man and speaks pompous words. The little horn becomes now the subject, the concentrated subject of the remainder of the book of Daniel. The details of Babylon, Media Persia, Greece, and even the first phase of Rome begin to trail off. Not a lot more is going to be said about them, and now with increased focus, the interest is upon the little horn. Now we know one thing right off the bat. We're dealing here with a succession of powers. And because we're dealing with a succession of powers, Babylon is conquered by Media Persia, which is conquered by Greece, which is conquered by Rome. So it's linear. Are you following? We know then that the little horn that arises among the 10 European nations is a power, it is a kingdom that succeeds the pagan Roman Empire, which conquered Greece and began to envelop the world at that time. Now, in order for us to really identify this power that succeeds, all you have to do is just basically do a little bit of reading in history, and it's not a big mystery to solve, but Daniel goes out of his way to give us 9 identifying characteristics. Actually, there's more like 10 or 12, but I'm going to give you the 9 most prominent identifying characteristics of this power. Number 1, this is all in verse 8 on this first slide. This little horn power is going to be small but become big. So we're looking for a power in history that begins rather minuscule and unobtrusive, and then it's going to become a massive empire. It comes up among the 10 horns, so now we have our geographic bearings. We're looking for a kingdom, a power, a small power at first, that's going to emerge, it's going to come up among the European nations. So now we've got our geographic bearings. This is astounding that God would tell us all of this in advance of the actual events. And then, number 3, it comes up after the division of the Roman Empire. So not only do we have our geographic bearings, but now we have our bearings linearly on the graph of time. So we know that this power is going to come up after Rome begins to implode upon itself and be invaded by the Gauls and the Germanic tribes and all those powers that came in and began to tear Rome to shreds. And then finally, you remember that this power would pluck up 3 horns. We noticed on night 1 that the 3 horns that were in fact made extinct in Europe. They're not there anymore. All the others are there, by the way, specified in Bible prophecy. Italy's still there. France is still there. Germany's still there. 7 of those powers are still intact as operable European nations to this day. But 3 are extinct. You can Google them. You can read about them. You can read exactly what little power it was that rose up and conquered the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. You can even Google Old World Western European maps, and you will see the territories that were occupied by the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. It's all there for anybody to discover and study. And then, notice, as the characteristics are further delineated, a prominent man is at the head of this power. Now, that's nothing new, because every one of these successive kingdoms has some prominent man, some king at the head, right? So that's not, but remember what we were told. Not only will this power have a man at its head, but do you remember in verse